And thank you, Peter. Hello, everyone. Before I continue with my presentation, I would like to read my disclaimer. Uh, Having worked for the state of Massachusetts, I'm not here as a representative of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. I'm here as someone who has worked extensively both in the domestic markets and the international markets, who provided advice and guidance in both, primarily international markets. So any views that I present here are solely my views. They do not represent any views of the current or previous employers and or clients. They are based on my understanding and experience with international markets and the national US market. Also, the materials that I present here, please do not consider them as advice for investment or policy. They are for discussion uh, because I'm looking at the realities, and based on what I understand the markets are, uh, I will solicit input and discussion later on. With that, let's see why I picked this topic: natural gas. According to the Energy Information Administration, the federal government, natural gas is the only fuel that produces as little as 53 kilograms of CO2 per MMBTU. If you recall, about 12 years ago, in his first State of the Union address, then President Obama called natural gas as the bridge fuel to a cleaner energy mix. And it continues in its role based on those statistics that you are seeing on your screens. As the United States economy is growing, we have reached a point, we reached about a little over a decade ago, where our emissions have started going down. And this is significant because we have managed to control uh, how much of CO2 we are emitting into the atmosphere. And that has been achieved primarily through the use of natural gas. Thanks to fracking, have abundant resources in this country, and we can convert our oil and coal generation to natural gas, thereby reducing our emissions in the atmosphere. And if this information, this statistic is not sufficient, uh, you can see how at the same time, although our energy consumption has been growing steadily yet slowly, our CO2 emissions have been reduced. This is information from the United States Department of Energy. And lastly, again, if that's not sufficient, you can see the reduction per capita of CO2 emissions. Uh, we definitely consume a lot of energy to power our phones, our TVs, our computers, our communications, yet per capita, per person, we have succeeded in reducing our energy consumption and thereby reducing our emissions. This information about the United States is important because while we over here and in Europe, you will see later on, have managed to reduce our CO2 emissions, this is not the case with the rest of the world. And although the global picture of CO2 emissions looks something like this, with a little blip around 2008, 2009, where there was an economic crisis, CO2 energy consumption continues to grow. And this information, according to BP, this chart, according to BP, shows exactly what I'm talking about. With the exception of 2008, 2009 period, where there was the economic crisis, we have continued to grow our energy demand. And 2019, the energy mix, global energy mix, comprised oil, coal, natural gas. Those were the three primary fuels. Of course, with nuclear, hydro, and renewables playing a lesser role. And this is very important because, as I showed you in the earlier slide, natural gas is the least CO2 producing fuel of the three, that is oil, coal, and natural gas. What does this do as a result? The United States, Canada in orange, and the European Union in gray have pretty much flattened our CO2 emissions. However, the rest of the world has not. Why is that? Because there is a significant part, as you saw in the previous slide, of coal consumption. Where does this coal consumption come from? it comes from Asia. You can see in the blue bars, you can see our consumption of energy, and in the orange line, you can see the CO2 emissions. You can see that although uh, we have managed to keep the CO2 emissions at a lower level relatively than Asia, Asia's CO2 emissions are much higher in relation to the energy they consume. And why is that? Here, I think, is the proof or the explanation of. If you look at the right bars on both charts, the 2018 and the 2019, you will see that the biggest chunk of energy consumption in Asia is based on coal. That is the gray area on those bars. Yes, the United States and Europe still use coal, but it's so much less. And we have managed to maintain our CO2 emissions lower because we have reduced our coal. Natural gas has helped us maintain those lower levels of CO2 emissions. And we can safely say that we are reaching a point where we are not the culprits of the global climate change that we are all worried about. Asia and primarily China and the other developing economies are still relying heavily on coal. And coal, as we said earlier, produces a significant amount of CO2. As we move forward, there is a global predicament, specifically in Asia, because I think my personal view is that Asia is the market that we need to approach with our natural gas in order to achieve the reductions in CO2, the reductions in global warming, and reach our goals of cleaner air. The problem that it's not really necessarily a problem, but the situation right now in Asia is, and I heard that recently from a friend who deals with the Asian Development Bank, is that a lot of generation plants in Asia are aging. They are primarily coal and oil. And the question that arises now is, how are they going to be replaced? Will they be replaced with coal plants, newer coal plants? Will they be replaced with natural gas burning plants? Will they be replaced with renewables? Actually, Vietnam recently started expanding its use of solar power for generation and rooftop solar. But again, Vietnam right now is a smaller economy in regards if you compare it to India and or China. And as the economies in Asia grow, the demand for energy is going to grow even more. And the question again that I posed earlier, how are these aging plants replaced? We have set several goals globally, not just the United States. This new administration will rejoin the Paris Agreement. So we are going to join a very large number of countries in, again, trying to reach the goals of reducing CO2 emissions and the -2 Celsius. There are no real alternatives to natural gas as of yet. And if we really want to achieve those reductions, we need to, even if we do not increase our natural gas consumption in the United States, we need to increase our production of natural gas in the United States in order to export and help those economies. Recently, Vietnam entered into agreements with Cheniere. Vietnam has started planning and developing gas-fired, LNG-fired generation. The same thing with India. India, as a matter of fact, I'm working with a group in the United States that deals with the Indian government as it is developing rules and regulations for the expansion of the natural gas system, both imports, interstate distribution, and local distribution rules and markets. Bangladesh, the Philippines, all are looking into expanding or starting LNG imports. In fact, Philippines the government in Philippines is approving 3 or 4 new projects as the country is that country as well is trying to wean itself off of coal. And I mentioned the countries of India, Thailand. I didn't mention Thailand, but I'm mentioning it now. Thailand, the Philippines, because I've worked with folks from these countries, and we had a lot of discussions on how you develop the gas markets, how do you develop the natural gas infrastructure. So, having said what I said about the international markets and how we can, I guess, get a bigger bang for our buck in the international markets, what are the alternatives for us in the United States? Everybody's is no everybody, but the majority of politicians now, on one side, are hoping for a greener environment and greener energy mix. But is it doable? Does a greener energy mix uh, imply? Hydrogen. Hydrogen is being touted in the United States and Europe as the fuel that will bring the solution to our global climate change problems. There are three types of hydrogen. If you've heard, again, if you are not really into hydrogen, there is the gray, the blue, and the green hydrogen. The gray and blue hydrogen are produced from natural gas and sometimes from clean coal. But the difference is that in the gray hydrogen, the CO2 is released in the atmosphere from the process, while in the blue hydrogen, the CO2 is captured and injected into the earth. The green hydrogen is pure electrolysis with oxygen released in the atmosphere and the hydrogen remaining as a fuel to be transported. However, and you are not going to hear much about it yet, even though every time I get a chance in my discussions with colleagues, both domestic and foreign, I bring it up. Hydrogen is not a safe fuel yet. We haven't figured out what the safe level in the mix that will be in order to prevent substantial cracking, fatigue, and fracture of the existing distribution system, or if we need to actually change the distribution system, which then creates a financial concern. So, is hydrogen ready to replace methane, natural gas? My personal view is no. So, I would take hydrogen out of the equation. So, what else is there out there? Some cities in the United States and Washington State have tried to ban natural gas. Berkeley was the first one, and it succeeded. Brookline, Massachusetts, is a fairly small town, suburb of Boston, you might call it, that banned natural gas in a town hall meeting where 100 people voted to ban natural gas. Unfortunately, the town has about 30,000 registered voters and 100 voters affected the ban. It was stricken down for a technicality by our Attorney General, but the move is still there. And very recently, Washington State's governor announced that he's going to pursue a strategy of removing natural gas from existing buildings in the next 20 or so years. Will those work? If you look at the chart, if you go back to the charts that I brought up early in my presentation, you can ban gas in California and Brookline, but that will not achieve anything in the grand scheme of things, because the rest of the world will produce the energy, and we want the rest of the world to learn from our technology and our processes in order to maximize the benefits both for their economies and their welfare and for the climate. So those are alternatives that people have presented. The jury is still out on that. Finally, and that I guess it's a Hail Mary shot. If we cannot really ban gas, let's bring in biomethane. That's another, in my mind, expensive undertaking that has been brought up recently in terms of natural gas consumption in the United States. There are varying definitions of RNG depending on where it's coming from. It can be landfills, farms, water and sewer processing and treatment plants. And my question about that is, who pays It's fantastic. We develop the technology, we clean it of the impurity, natural, we clean it from the impurities, and we inject into the system. The question is, who should be paying for it? Up until now, we were following a policy of the polluter pays. Under this new proposed RNG strategies, it will be the end user that will pay. So anyone can pollute, can throw the trash, allow the methane to seep into the environment, pay nothing. And when a gas customer is forced to buy RNG, renewable natural gas, then the town, the facility that created this methane gets a financial benefit. Is it equitable? The jury is still out, and that's up to you to make a decision. So it's a cost recovery issue. Who pays? Does the polluter pay or does the consumer pay? And having said all that, I'm coming to my last final slide. Uh, so we all want a clean environment, not just for ourselves, for our children and grandchildren. I was impressed at how clear the skies looked in March and April of 2020. Very few buses and trucks on the roads, very few airplanes in the sky. I don't know if it was in my mind or if they actually the air was cleaner that we were breathing, and we all want that to be with us on this planet for a long time. But we also have to consider what the costs are of any action that we will take, and we do not want to continue with the energy poverty issue. Yes, there are still parts of this world where energy poverty, where people cannot pay for their medication in order to stay warm in the winter. And we have to be careful in the energy mix that we choose going forward, because we do not want to perpetuate the situation when a retiree has to decide between bread, medication, or freezing pipes. And that's the economic cost is very important. Uh, if we are going to replace global coal generating facilities with natural gas, at least there is the technology is similar. Some conversions, oil, which is if you remember the earlier slide, global consumption, oil is uh, more exajoules of oil are consumed than coal. So if you're converting, let's say, an oil burning facility to per natural gas, the cost of the infrastructure is way less than building a brand new renewables facility in order to develop renewable energy, uh, produce renewable energy in your mix. So we have to take into consideration this. And the question that then is the final question is, where would the best investment be? It is no secret. The air that we breathe does not come from our neighborhoods, does not come from our towns, does not come from our counties or our states. It's global. The wind blows all over the planet. So we can be as clean as we can in the United States or in Europe. However, if you have a lot of coal generation, a lot of CO2 emitted in Asia, as I showed you in an earlier slide, then we haven't achieved anything. We need to make sure that we invest in places that will provide us with a safer, not just financial investment, but with a safer process of cleaning our air and the atmosphere and the environment. And with that, I'm ready for any questions that you may have. Thank you very much for listening.